Okay, so I know I'm throwing a lot of numbers at you, but I find this to be very interesting because it informs why cities, for example, like Dearborn, Michigan, we showed that video from Dearborn, Michigan last week on the show. It was this enormous auditorium filled to the rafters with quote unquote Palestinian protesters. They were there for solidarity with the Palestinians, but it was really just a pro-Hamas, pro-terrorism rally. And there was such a huge amount of people for the Midwest. Well, Dearborn, Michigan has the highest percentage of Muslim population of any city in the country, or not even any city, any state in the country. They have the highest concentration of Muslim population. So it's not exactly an extrapolation for us to observe that where there are pockets of Muslim immigrants, the worldview and the value system is not only different, but sometimes in contradiction of what we know to be American values, or sometimes what we know to be morally correct, which is you don't support terrorism, you don't rape women, you don't behead babies, you don't kidnap elderly people and then murder them and upload the video to Facebook so that their grandchildren see it first on social media. You'd think that would be baseline everywhere, but apparently it is not. So then we have the projection. What is going to happen if we continue this level of immigration over the next, well, now we're only 7 years away from this. Pew Research did a population projection, and this is what they write. In the United States, for example, the population projections show that the number of Muslims will more than double over the next 2 decades, rising from 2.6 million in 2010 to 6.2 million in 2030, in large part because of immigration and higher than average fertility among Muslims. The Muslim share of the U.S. population, both adults and children, is projected to grow from 0.8% in 2010 to 1.7% in 2030, making Muslims roughly as numerous as Jews or Episcopalians are in the United States today. And by the way, 81% of all Muslims in our country most of them live in just 8 states: Texas, Illinois, Virginia, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Maryland, North Carolina, and Washington, D.C. So I think it's fair to sit here and say, well, unrestricted immigration and immigration that does not select based on values is a problem. It has caused a shift, a demographic or a cultural demographic shift in our country. It's not about the color of people's skin. It's not about black people or brown people. It is about what the people coming to our country believe. And then, of course, this is compounded by our second point tonight, which is the fact that we make no effort as a country to assimilate immigrants into American culture. People that come to our country are no longer expected to learn to be American. They are no longer expected to, quote unquote, act like Americans, which, again, I know that's a phrase that triggers the left, but they are no longer expected to value American values, to understand the Judeo-Christian principles that underpin everything about our legal system and our government structure. There's not even indoctrination in government-run schools anymore. And you know that this is a topic that I'm not going to let go. Our public school system was supposed to be a point of assimilation. It was supposed to be a point of indoctrination in American principles and Judeo-Christian principles. It was supposed to teach children, particularly immigrant children, but all American children, how to be American citizens, to understand and appreciate why our government was framed the way that it was, on the values that it is, and it no longer does this. So back in 2015, around the time that Trump made that statement, a complete moratorium on Muslim immigration until we figure out what the hell is going on, those of us who made any comments like this, if we had a conversation like this, I would have gotten a billion accusations of not only being Islamophobic and xenophobic, but also I would have been told these radical Islamists that commit acts of terror, these jihadists, don't represent your average Muslim. It's like 2 completely different religions. That's what the left would tell us, including some leftists or some Muslims who are very politically leftist. And this was a line that you would hear over and over and over. Jihadists and radical Islamists do not represent your average Muslim. It is like a separate religion. Again, I was called Islamophobic at the time for showing you studies that indicate that that's not true. I'm not saying every Muslim is a jihadist. Obviously not. No one of good faith and more than an ounce of brain cells would assume as much. But studies indicate that the percentage of Muslims who are sympathetic to radical Islamists and jihadists is not a mere fraction. It's not a mere fringe. There are actually a significant percentage of particularly young Muslims who do sympathize with jihadism and terrorism. So quoting from Pew Research, you can go and look this up for yourself if you would like to confirm it. Media Matters, talking to you. Pew Research poll from 2007, this is even 15 years ago, so I imagine it's gotten worse, found that 26% of young Muslims in America, this is just in America, believe that suicide bombings are justified. So think about, you meet a millennial Muslim, 1 out of every 4 thinks that suicide bombing is justified. That's not a fringe percentage of Muslims. That's not a big differentiation between your quote-unquote average Muslim and these radical jihadists. That's a significant ideological problem that exists in a significant minority of Muslims in America. In addition, this Pew Research poll found that these views among young Muslims about suicide bombers were fairly static for Muslims in other Western countries as well. 22% of young Muslims in Germany thought suicide bombings are justified, 29% of young Muslims in Spain, and 42% of young Muslims in France believe that suicide bombings are justified. 42%. So almost 1 out of every 2 young Muslims in France thinks suicide bombings are justified. So this is starting to make a little more sense why we are facing what we're facing with these protests, these pro-Hamas protests that kind of caught us all off guard, but maybe it shouldn't have caught us off guard because this is a problem that has been building for quite some time. A 2015 poll from the polling company found that 19% of Muslim Americans, that's 2 out of every 10 Muslims in America, say that violence is justified in order to make Sharia law the law of the land in the United States. So think of 2 out of every 10 Muslims thinks it's okay to be violent towards you to make you adhere to Sharia law. Are we supposed to believe that this is a tiny fringe of Muslims, or is this a cultural, religiously ideological difference between the Muslim population and a country like ours that embraces Judeo-Christian values? Again, doesn't mean that you can't come here and go to the mosque, doesn't mean that you're not allowed to be Muslim in our country. You are, we have religious liberty. But to have an unrestricted number of people who have these beliefs come to our country, and then for our country not to make any effort to assimilate them into American values is going to cause a cultural divide, might be the tamest term that I can think of to describe it. 25% of Muslim Americans say that violence against Americans in the United States is justified as part of global jihad. Again, 1 out of 4. 1 out of 4. The numbers actually in Britain are even worse. So it wasn't just America, it wasn't just in American cities that we saw these protests pop up. They were in London, in Austria, in Germany, in France. And France especially. It was terrible. France banned them, and what happened, banned these pro-Palestinian protests. And Muslims just said, yeah, right, we have too large of a number of us against you for you to tell us what to do. And they turned out anyway, because the religion of Islam is now the most practiced religion in France. The most practiced religion in France is the religion of Islam because they allowed an unlimited number of Muslims. Some of them came under the name of refugee, and it's changed the cultural demographic of their country. It's completely changed it.